Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in this evening. I hope you've got a glass of wine in your hand or water or something. My name is Kate Tarrant and I work for the Lower Blackwood Landcare Group based in the southwest of Western Australia. For those of you that don't know us, we are a not-for-profit independent land care organisation with an interest in sustainable agriculture and the broader environment and river health in the Lower Blackwood catchment. You can find out more about us and the work we do on our website at lowerblackwood.com.au. Today's webinar forms part of a collaborative project with RegenWA called Make Your Hectare Count. The project is supported by funding from the West Australian Government's State NRM program. Before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge that our Lower Blackwood catchment and the work we do falls within Wadandi and Pubamin Budja, within which our streams and tributaries flow to join the Gulbulyup or Blackwood River. We recognise and we respect that the Wadandi and Pubamin ancestors and their descendants are the traditional custodians of this country and have a long and continuing connection to this land. Just a few words about how the webinar will run today. You may have noticed that you can hear us but not speak yourself, and that's deliberate so that we can keep things moving along at a good pace. You can definitely still ask questions though, so please don't be shy. Just type your question at any time into the chat box and I'll make sure it gets asked. Dan has said he's happy for interruptions, so please, if you want to ask a question in the middle of the presentation, that's absolutely fine. If you do run into any technical difficulties, just let me know in the chat box and I'll see if I can do something at my end, or if not, don't worry, we are recording the session and I will be emailing that out to you next week. All right, so now to the reason you have all tuned in this evening. I'm delighted to introduce Dan Kittredge. Dan is a lifelong farmer, educator and passionate advocate for growing nutrient-dense food. With decades of experience in regenerative agriculture and a deep understanding of soil science, Dan has made it his mission to empower farmers, gardeners and consumers to unlock the full potential of their crops and landscapes. In this webinar, Dan is going to talk you through how to make your home vegetable garden and orchard more productive, resilient and nutrient rich. So without further ado, welcome Dan, and I'll hand over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kate. Very excited to be here today. Dawn is just breaking here in Massachusetts in the Northern Hemisphere, Eastern US. We're 12 hours behind you guys, so it's 7 o'clock in the morning for me. I'm really happy to be able to be here and speak to this topic of getting the best from your home veggie patch. Yeah, as Kate said, I'm a lifelong farmer. Glorified homestead, I think, probably is a more realistic scale concept. So actually a lot of my experience is quite appropriate for this. I've been able to make a living farming on not much land. So but yeah, it really is at human scale where I found most of my fulfillment in producing. So that's not with big machinery. Yeah, so I'll just proceed forward here through the slides, and as Kate said, very much receptive to questions and comments as they come to you. So, all right, here we are. I think the basic point here that I like to convey when I'm speaking about this is that we're dealing with a living system. Nature's been growing plants for literally hundreds of millions of years before we invented fertilizer and all sorts of other products. And so for me, the central question is, how did nature evolve things to work? And then can we identify what limiting factors there are that are inhibiting our systems from operating optimally and address them? I really do believe that when we're able to create the dynamic where life is flourishing, is when we get the optimal system function. There's probably a couple of really basic insights that are necessary to really sort of grok what I'm going to be presenting here today. The first one is that there's a really important reason why plants are green, and that is because they were actually evolved by microbes to feed them. So the microbes evolved the plants to feed the microbes. That's how it happened in evolutionary biology. And the way that plants do that is they make sugar out of sunlight and oxygen, and carbon dioxide and water. And a vast majority of that sugar that the plant manufactures in nature is injected down through the stem, through the roots, and into the soil to feed the soil life. And so, yeah, the way plants grow in nature is in deep and profound symbiosis with their microbiome. And so, from my perspective, I don't really care whether you're growing a broccoli or a cauliflower or a cucumber or a carrot. What I care about is how well is that gut flora of the plant functioning. I think a lot of people these days are conversant with this concept that we can't digest our food. It's only the people inside of us that digest our food for us. It's the microbes, the bacteria, and the fungi, and the archaea, and everything in our guts that are the ones who can, pull apart the nutrients, the compounds that are food, and make them bioavailable. It's extremely similar for the plant. The plant actually is unable to digest the soil. It's only through that symbiotic relationship with the microbes that they can accomplish it. So, if that concept is comfortable for you, then there's the real questions become, how do we optimize the environment for the microbes? And what I've got written down here in the slide are minerals, biology, carbon, water, and air. So I'll spend a couple minutes here on this slide. I think it's pretty important. For those of us who have farms, who have pets or anything, we may be conversant with the idea that animals need air to breathe, right? That's kind of a obvious thing. I like to use the example and say, if you've got a chicken, a laying hen, and left to her own devices, she might live for 3 or 4 or 5 years. If you were to zip tie a plastic bag over her head for 10 minutes at age 13 months, right, she wouldn't continue to live till age 3 or 4 or 5 years. She would die because she ran out of air for that 10-minute period. She needs to respire continuously to be able to live. That's a self-evident statement for most people, but I think what we don't consider is that our microbes in the soil need air to breathe as well. And when you've got tight, hard, compact soil, one of the things that means is it doesn't have air in it. And so figuring out a way to facilitate aeration is crucial, because without that, you don't have the microbes functioning well. Without the microbes functioning well, you won't have your plants functioning well. So some people use rototillers. Some people use, there's manual tools you can use. I'm not a big fan of regular disturbance of the soil, but you understand that if you don't have air in it, it's not going to function well. So I'm not particularly, bothered with what the strategy is. Ideally, when you get your soil to be aerated, then you can maintain that level of soil life. Then you don't need to continuously disturb it. But certainly, what I did on my farm when I first bought it, and the soil was very tight, was I came through and tilled that sod to open up the soil. I use the example of mulch. Where I live here, it's just ground is not yet frozen, but it's going to be frozen soon. And this would be the time when we would plant our garlic historically. So we may have just finished picking all the carrots and the beets and the potatoes and sticking them in the root cellar, and now we're planting garlic in that area where those root crops grew. We'll oftentimes mulch that garlic. So after we plant it, put a nice layer of mulch hay down on it, and then the winter comes, the ground freezes, the snow comes, and by April, the ground will have thawed out, and the garlic will be starting to grow. What we'll oftentimes see, if you've got, say it was a a quarter acre of root crops that got pulled and an eighth of an acre of garlic that got planted, we wouldn't likely have mulched that area where the root crops were pulled but garlic wasn't planted. And when the spring comes, if you pull back the mulch and you look down to see the soil, next to the garlic that's growing, you'll see piles of worm castings, and you can stick your hand in there and get a nice handful of beautiful, rich soil. But directly adjacent, where that soil was bare for the previous couple of months, it's actually much more like dirt. It's tighter, it's harder, it's cracked, and what we can see there is that through the function of food, which I've got written here as carbon, keeping the soil covered, what we've been able to do is to keep the soil fed. So those microbes, when we don't have anything green growing leaves injecting sugars into the soil, they still need to eat. And so if you manage your garden in such a fashion as there to be bare soil or nothing growing for periods of time, understand that what you're effectively doing to the microbes is causing them to starve to death. So I like to ask the question, where in nature do you see bare soil? And most people will say, in a desert. And I'll say, how well is nature doing in desert? What's the level of vitality of the ecosystem? And it's not optimal, right? It's not high. And so ensuring that we have soil covered, whether it's with green things growing, you can do cover crops or brown layers of mulch, straw, hay, leaves, things like that, is foundational. It keeps the water in. It keeps the soil life fed. It's really a key piece of this puzzle. So there's air and food, or carbon. Again, water is one of those critical environmental conditions. I don't know how much people understand. I like to say the objective is not to water your plants. The objective is to keep your microbes watered. As above, so below. Oftentimes people will put maybe one line of drip tape down the middle of a bed if they want to keep basic moisture going. If you've got a 5-foot tall tomato plant, big arching, beautiful plant, imagine that there should be as much plant below ground as there is plant above ground. And those roots, should be reaching out to form like a 5-foot sort of radius or diameter. One line of drip tape down the middle where the stem hits the ground is not going to maintain moisture across the entire soil profile. If you don't maintain moisture across the entire soil profile, wherever it is that you can reach down and pick up a handful of powder, understand that lack of moisture has been foundational in causing the microbes to die out. So ensuring that you can maintain moisture across the entire soil profile, I think, is another one of those absolutely central key strategic practices that needs to be considered or implemented for success. What I'll do on my farm, I've got 4-foot wide beds and 1-foot wide pathways. I'll put 3 lines of drip tape in that 4-foot wide bed. That's a little over a meter. And I want to be able to, and then I'll mulch. I always try to mulch everything I can in my garden. Not everything, but almost all things get mulched. So when you put that seed or seedling in, put the drip tape down, and then if it's the appropriate type of crop where the plants aren't that close together, cover that soil in a nice layer of mulch. That'll keep the soil fed. It'll keep the soil moist. That'll keep the soil aerated, actually. Okay, the last 2 key pieces, the key limiting factors to address are the minerals and life itself. I think my next couple of slides go into, well, I'll talk about minerals in a second. But yeah, from a foundational standpoint, in many cases, our soils are fairly weathered. I think your soils in Western Australia are fairly ancient soils. They are not, new. They don't have a full suite of nice fresh minerals in them. It seems like there's a whole suite of different elements that are necessary for what we call biochemistry, for enzyme system function. I use the examples of B12, and a lot of people may have heard about the fact that we need B12 to function. Sometimes people that are vegans or vegetarians are told that they may not be getting enough B12 in their plant-based diet, and so they're suggested to supplement it. At the center of this compound B12 is this element, cobalt. It's actually in science called cyanocobalamin, that thing we call B12, and that's because it's a cobalt-based compound. So what that means is, if you don't have cobalt present, you can't have B12. And we're told that if we don't have enough B12, we'll become lethargic, we'll become weak, and really, if you become totally B12 deficient, you'll become dead. Like you need a certain amount to live. So, like that with the soil life, actually about 80% of the species that have been studied are understood to be B12 dependent. Like they literally can't exist in the soil if there's not a sufficient level of cobalt out of which to make B12. We're not oftentimes taught about the full spectrum of minerals in farming, in many cases, or gardening. In many cases, we're told to look at nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, sometimes calcium or sulfur for pH. But when we look at how nature evolved things to work, there's actually a very broad diversity of different elements that are foundational in life system functioning well. So addressing those deficiencies in minerals is a key piece of this puzzle. I'll go into all these topics a little bit more deeply as I proceed through the presentation. And the final one is life itself. We have, in many cases, dynamics where the soils, again, have been abused, have been worn, have been weathered. Toxins may have been applied. And so a full spectrum of species of life that you'd like to see present may not be actually operational in that soil. So this is probably one of the least expensive, easiest, simplest, biggest bang for your buck things you can do, as far as I'm concerned, is to inoculate, to ensure that a full spectrum of species of microbes that are optimal for that gut function of the plant are present at birth. We think about colostrum, whether it's for cows or for pigs or for humans, that thing which comes out of the mother's breast after birth, before milk, which has evolved actually to establish a healthy gut flora, right? When you're born, you don't have that suite of microbes in your alimentary canal necessary for digestion to occur. You need to support, stimulate, establish, inoculate them. And so in the same way that we need to be having our guts inoculated at birth with a healthy suite of microbes, the plant also needs to have its gut inoculated at birth with a healthy suite of microbes. We call that inoculation in the plant kingdom, and we basically want to ensure there's a nice spectrum of species on that seed. So there's various forms of powder and liquid inoculant you can make yourself or purchase. Again, we'll talk about that as we proceed through the hour here. But these are the 5 key limiting factors I like to focus on: air, water, food, minerals, and life. My experience has been that if you can ensure that across the garden, at all points in time, these 5 basic things are present, nature will do most of the work for you. And all you have to do is go out and pick. So that's sort of the opening position there. I guess we're 20 minutes in, but if that's hopefully people are comfortable with those thoughts. I think I effectively made this point. Life is the objective. Supporting and empowering soil life is the key to healthy plants. Things that so a corollary of that is things that you do or let be done that harm soil life, harm your plants. Again, letting the soil dry out, leaving it bare. These are things that you have agency over, and if that does happen, understand there are some very significantly negative repercussions that will occur because that happened. So think about if you've got children, or you've got a pet, or you've got animals. They need water to drink. They need food to eat. They need air to breathe. Just if you can understand that microbes are just like that, then when you're out there in the garden, think about them and think about how they're doing and how they're, which needs they have that maybe aren't being met right now and how you can address them. Okay, from my perspective, the reason that we grow food is to eat and for us to be well. And there's a really amazing connection between flavor and aroma and nutritional caliber. And this is a topic and a point that I'm very, very passionate about. People have had the experience of eating a tomato off of the grocery store shelf in the middle of the winter. Maybe, and you've had one in the middle of the summer that was fresh out of the garden. Like, as an animal, that very, very visceral flavor difference between those tomatoes. Understand that is a nutritional difference. Understand that what you're sensing in your mouth, in your nose, those very sophisticated senses of flavor and aroma are actually nutrition monitoring senses, right? We can determine the relative quality of the food by that thing, which is almost goes by uninvestigated. So it really does seem to be the case that the healthier the food is for you, the healthier the plant is, the stronger and more intense the flavor is. I'm not talking about sweet, I'm talking about flavor. So this is a corollary, and effectively, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most important reasons to have a garden is because it's quite difficult. Well, there's many, many good reasons to have a garden, but most of what's on the supermarket shelf is of relatively poor nutritional caliber, and that connects really nicely to our overall system function. So yeah, it's the nutritional caliber, which is the thing which you have control over, which has a massive impact on the health of your family, which is what we're trying to accomplish here. Broadly, as far as I'm concerned, there's some beautiful connections between soil health, plant health, human health, cultural and environmental health. These things are not separate. You can't have a healthy plant in unhealthy soil. You can't have healthy humans without the core substance of their food being of good caliber. So these are all beautifully interrelated. All right, so I'm going to go now into some of the more specific details here of the different pieces of the puzzle I was just conveying. The first one here is on the mineral side. I was just down in Western Australia. I think it was just last month, actually. Yeah, and I'm fairly certain there was a couple labs out there that are doing this Albrecht style test that I'm going to be recommending. Dr. William Albrecht actually grew up on a farm, but he was the head of the University of Missouri Soil Department for 20 years in the 30s and 40s into the 50s, and he developed a mode of assessment of soil that looks sort of more holistically at what causes system function, as opposed to a lot of the tests now that seem to be more focused on trying to sell fertilizer. And so these are some basic ratios and levels of minerals we'd like to see in the soil. And when you can find them to be insufficient, that's when you want to target what's things to be adding. There's a whole suite of different types of materials you can use. I don't think I've got enough time here today to go into that full explication. But I'm going to be generally recommending rock minerals to address deficiencies. So there's rock phosphate, there's limestone, there's gypsum, there's green sand, things like that. Naturally mined materials that have relatively high concentrations of the different elements can be used to systemically address mineral deficiencies. This next slide I have here focuses on the trace elements: boron, manganese, copper, zinc, cobalt, molybdenum, selenium. This is sort of at least a few to focus on. There's obviously many more that are very, very beneficial, but these are things that can be fairly readily tested and target levels to be looking for in each of them. Again, if you want to see optimal system function, these things are crucial for life to function. And that there's a book called How to Grow World Record Tomatoes, and it's a country boy farmer from down south here in the U.S. Wrote it, and the picture on the cover is there's a platform and a ladder, and a ladder on the platform, and he's on the top of the ladder, and his tomato plants are 10 meters tall, between 28 and 32 feet, and there's I think 320 pounds of fruit on average on each plant of the 4 plants there that he grew to get him into the Guinness Book of World Records. I tell people, if you've never seen a 2-meter tall eggplant or pepper, you maybe have never considered that's possible. If you've never seen a tomato plant yield 50 or 80 pounds of fruit, you might not have considered that's possible. What is possible with our plants is absolutely stupendous. And in many cases, some of these core nutrients are actually the limiting factor in getting that to occur. And one of the things we can do with our gardens, where there's not a lot of space, and so the logistics of cost shouldn't be such an issue, as we can make sure to dial in these nutrient levels to really optimize system function. I will say that if you don't want to take the soil testing route and work to get these nutrient levels up in the soil in such a specific fashion, some basic natural materials like basalt or granite, dust, and sea salt are wonderful broad spectrum remineralizing materials. So I generally recommend the sea salt at about 75 pounds per acre, or 75, like I said, would be kilos per hectare. So not a lot. The rock dust, the basalt and granite can be, a couple tons or more per acre. I think would probably be beneficial for everybody down there in Western Australia, due to the fact of how worn and weathered those soils are. But yeah, however you do it, addressing some of these underlying mineral deficiencies, I think, is a really strategic piece of the broader puzzle. I would say, yeah, understanding how ancient your soils are, working to get those mineral levels back up is going to be really, really beneficial. Okay. All right. This is the Bionutrient Food Association, and is an organization that I'm founder and executive director of. I would just say that we have an immense amount of content that we've created. A lot of it's on our YouTube channel. So if any of the things here that I'm discussing are piquing your interest, I've got courses that are 12 hours long that go into all these things in much more depth. We've been hosting conferences since I think 2012. Every single speaker at every conference has been recorded and is on our YouTube channel. So for those who are looking for more knowledge or more depth in this broader conversation, look us up online and feel free to take advantage of all those free resources that are present. Okay, inoculation, as I said before, another one of these key pieces of the puzzle. The basic topic, as I said, was colostrum, that concept of colostrum. There's a number of different ways that you can source inoculants. You can certainly purchase them. For those who do purchase inoculants, what I suggest is that you look for something that's going to be having a very broad spectrum of bacteria and fungi. So, dozens of families, at least, on both sides of the equation. People may be familiar with the idea of a bean and pea inoculant that you put on your legume plants that helps stimulate nitrogen fixation or support that nitrogen fixation process. That'll in many cases just be 2 species, a Azotobacter or a Rhizobacter, that are put in that inoculant. What we're looking for is hundreds, if not thousands, of species. So if you're going to be purchasing something, that will be what to look for. We just had on our conference, actually, last week, I think it was, Di and Ian Haggerty, fairly famous farmers there from Western Australia. And they are, one of the only things it seems that they do on their, whatever it is, 25,000 hectares, is inoculate. And they, use a combination of, I think it's worm juice and compost extract. But they make sure to coat and cover every one of their seeds with this very inexpensive, natural, you can make it yourself, broad spectrum inoculant. It seems to be like one of the key things that they do in their entire fertility program is just ensure that full spectrum of species is present. It's completely impressive what happens when you do reestablish this. And again, worm juice and compost extract, these are easily procured, made yourself. You don't need to go out and spend any money to buy them. Ideally, your plants would have what's called a core microbiome. So effectively, when the seeds are drying down in from the previous generation, whatever the spectrum of microbiome is on the mother plant will be actually literally taken into the seed, and then as the seed germinates, actually the microbes will come out of it. What's important in this regard is where you're sourcing your seed from. If you're saving your seed, if you had healthy mother plants, that's one thing. And that's really how nature did it. Nobody was actually going and adding inoculants in nature. That was it was part of the process that was cycled through and evolved. In many cases, people buy inoculants, however, or buy seed, and they buy seed from farms where the mother plants were not particularly healthy, where they would have needed, insecticides or fungicides to be kept alive long enough for those seeds to mature. That's a sign that mother plant was not healthy. The application of the insecticides and fungicides, right? Side means kill, would have had a very powerfully detrimental effect on the microbiome of that mother plant. And so, I'm going to suggest in a moment here that saving your seeds is probably a great strategy. But until you do, making sure that you can establish a full spectrum of species there at birth, at germination, is going to be critically important. Okay, yeah, seed. So we go from the inoculant, which is a fairly simple and inexpensive thing to do. Very, very powerful. I generally suggest if you just do one thing of all the things I suggest, that inoculation would be the thing to do. We go next to this topic of seed and seed quality. And as I just said, in many cases, the seed we purchase does come from an epigenetic line of many generations of mother plants that were not necessarily healthy. If they were grown out in a chemical fertilizer system, effectively they've been trained not to function well with nature. And so people understand the impact of the health of the grandmother affects the health of the mother, affects the health of the daughter. We know about that when we're, selecting our which cows go to slaughter, which cows don't. If you're managing a herd, you want to you pay attention to who your mothers are and which ones they aren't. This principle is exactly applicable with plants as well. And so, if you don't save your seed, seriously consider starting. I think it's a really important piece of this puzzle, which is in many cases difficult to solve in short, right? It'll take a year or two of actually growing things out on your farm to get that very positive shift in system function. One of the other pieces I like to focus on here is spacing. Not sure how many people have explored or experimented with spacing and looked at when the seed germinates, which ones germinate faster, which seedlings you work with. My general suggestion is the seeds that germinate faster, that grow with more vigor, are the ones that you should be selecting and planting out into the field, and the ones that germinate more slowly, which will come from smaller seeds, right? You can actually take a handful of seed, think of tomato seeds perhaps. Like some of them will be fat and some of them will be flat. They may all germinate, but the fat ones will germinate in 5 days and the flat ones will germinate in 12 days. Those ones that germinate first were the fatter seeds. They had greater vigor. Those are the ones we should be putting out into the garden and culling the rest. And on my farm, I put my tomatoes at a 5-foot center. So one here, what's that? Almost 2 meters, 1.6 meters, or something like that, between plants. My experience is when I give my plants enough space, they begin to be able to realize their full potential. Actually, packing them in together is one of those things where you're taught that it's going to be more efficient and you're going to get more production, but actually it doesn't seem to. This SRI, SCI thing I've got labeled here, system of rice intensification, system of crop intensification, is where global records have been accomplished of production of a number of different crops. I think specifically rice and potatoes, literally more, kilos per hectare than ever in any plot ever happened in SRI or SCI plots, where actually what they're doing is they're putting the seedlings in much farther apart, giving each plant enough space to really realize its full potential. If you think about a big, beautiful arching, I'm not sure if you have oaks down there, but oak tree, a tree that's been given enough space, it's got this big, beautiful arching structure, will produce many more acorns than if you got oaks that only had 20 feet between each other and they went straight up, went vertical, have a little small top. They don't actually produce that many nuts. So it does seem to be the case that when you give those plants with better vigor at birth, at germination, that started with larger seed, more space, you actually can dramatically increase the amount of yield you receive. It seems perhaps counterintuitive, but as with all things, I generally recommend, I say, experiment. Don't take my word for it. Experiment. See what you can see in your own garden, and then if that seems to follow, then you can, spread it out across the whole. All right. I think that covers what I wanted to say about seed. Again, if we use the metaphor of the cycles of life, we think about germination as birth. I think about transplanting out into the field as kindergarten. I think of the first flowering as puberty. Think of filling fruit as pregnancy. These metaphors, I think, are helpful for us to be able to intuit what's going on in the plant, where it's at, etc. So oftentimes people will start their seeds inside, in trays, in pots, in a media that does not actually have the full spectrum of things in it you'd like your plants to eat. So what I say to people as a metaphor is, would it be appropriate to feed your children macaroni and cheese between birth and kindergarten? Most people say no. No, it wouldn't be. You'd want to give your children a balanced diet when they're young. We understand the importance of that early childhood development, and we want to really optimize their immune system, their everything else early in life, because that'll have a powerful impact for the rest of life. Well, that which you start your seeds in, that media, that material that you start your seeds in, that they live in for that first 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of life, can be considered to be, what you would feed your child between birth and kindergarten. So my basic point is we would like to have a really broad spectrum of minerals, microbes, etc. in that ecosystem. We absolutely would not want to have fertilizers, those little pellets of, salt fertilizer that'll train the plant to not have a healthy microbiome. We want at early in life, it's all about establishing that good, healthy gut flora. And so I've got listed here on the slide a number of things that you could consider. I would say foundationally, having a compost base to your potting soil would be strategic. In many cases, it's just sort of a cocoa coir or peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, and some of these little salt fertilizers that are in the packets that you buy. So understand the importance of that, and yeah, please do change. That's a really simple, easy one. Hopefully a lot of these things are fairly simple and easy. They don't cost a lot of money, but the impacts are really, really powerful. Okay, that's potting soil. Tillage and soil cover. I think I covered this before. It's really certainly very important, as I said, to have air in the soil. If there's a penetrometer, which is an instrument people can use for sort of measuring the level of compaction. But I like to use my hand. I like to use my hand as a way to reach down and see how far I can get. If you haven't dug in your soil recently, and you don't want to get too much dirt underneath your fingernails, get a shovel and start digging and see if you can find layers where you have a compaction layer, etc. That'll it's so important that you do not have that compact layer in the soil or significant compaction. So, as I said before, tillage, I would say, is strategic. If your soil is very tight, to loosen it up. Once it is loosened up, we want to try to maintain it in that fashion. And what I said before was keeping it covered and keeping it moist are great ways to keep that structure in the soil. If it goes bare for a while, if it dries out, it'll oftentimes compact down. That compacting is when it goes from soil to dirt. And that's when the levels of life go from high to low, right? Soil is a beautiful thing. Dirt is that relatively inert material that is, much less valuable. The basic strategy here, whether you're going to start with tillage or not, get it up to that living, loose structure. Keep it covered. Keep it moist. I said permanent raised beds is what I have on my farm. So there's like a little divot. I make it with a tractor, a bed former. It's about 1 foot wide and about 6 inches deep between the beds. And I walk there, and I've got my 3 lines of gyp tape and on the bed, and then I mulch, unless I'm doing something like lettuce, everything I possibly can. Then as the season proceeds, when the crops are beginning to, have run their course, I'll undersow with a cover crop mix. So as the tomatoes are coming to the end of their season, undersow with cover crops. Get a nice diverse spectrum of species planted in there. So we actually never go to a point where there's nothing green growing. We want to, if possible, keep green things growing throughout the entire 12 months of the year. And if not, keep it covered, because that'll help keep the air in the soil. Okay. Complexing compounds here. This is a really important piece of the puzzle. A lot of people struggle with things like pests and disease. There's Phytophthora and Rhizoctonia and Pythium. There's the downy mildew and the powdery mildew. There's all kinds of various corn earworms and tomato hornworm and Colorado potato beetle, and there's a whole suite of different pests and diseases that are oftentimes experienced by the crops in the garden, and that, as I understand it, is a sign that nature's trying to communicate to you, which is that these plants are not of optimal health. There's a process, a biochemical process that goes on in the plant where, like I said, you start with photosynthesis to make the sugar, right, from carbon dioxide and water and sunlight. If you have the proper nutrients present, those simple sugars will be complexed and turned into what we call complete carbohydrates, sort of long chain, stable, multi-sugar molecules. From there, the plant will begin to build, complete proteins out of amino acids. It can then build complete lipids, the fats and oils. And when the plant is really actually quite healthy, it'll build these high levels of these aromatic compounds. The phytoalexins, phytonutrients, plant secondary metabolites are all different words for this same basic thing. We see at this level of complexing of compounds a direct connection to pest and disease resistance. So now the point is, it's not about growing a a pound of carrots or a kilogram of tomatoes. It's about growing that carrot with the, really amazing carrot aroma, the tomato with a delicious tomato flavor. Those compounds that we as animals experience as flavor and aroma, as I said at the beginning, are actually symptoms of a whole suite of biochemical complexity having occurred. So the next slide here goes into this as it pertains to pest and disease resistance. As the plant is able to build complete carbohydrates out of simple sugars, it becomes physiologically indigestible to these soil-borne pathogens, Fusarium, Verticillium, Alternaria, or a couple I've got written here. As a plant is able to build complete proteins, right? This is all, it's able to build these complex compounds because the full suite of nutrients is present in the plant. And that full suite of nutrients is only going to be present when the microbiome is functioning well and has access to all the nutrients in the soil. So that's how plants evolved to grow, was through a really sophisticated feedback loop with soil life. When that is functional, when they have access to what they need, they build these compounds in their bodies, which make them taste good to us and make them literally indigestible for these what we call pathogens. Complete proteins gives you resistance, indigestible to the larval forms of insects. Complete lipids, the fats and oils. Complete indigestibility to the mildews and blights. And the phytoalexins, the secondary metabolites, to the beetles. So I like to say, if nature's sending in the fungi to eat your plants, what she's telling you is those plants are fit for fungi to eat. If she's sending in the larvae, she's telling you those plants are fit for larvae to eat. We have more sophisticated digestive tracts. Snails, yeah, I would put snails in that in the adult insect category. So with the beetles, that would be the secondary metabolites, sort of the highest level before you get to, or the last step before you get to human caliber food. This might be I'll just maybe walk through this in one different way of explaining. Sometimes when I'm teaching a course, I'll say, if there was a bale of hay in this room when you walked in amongst the chairs, would you have considered sitting on it? And most people say, yeah, probably would have considered sitting on it. And I say, would you have considered eating it? Most people say, no, I would not have considered eating it. And I say, if we'd walked a cow in here, do you think she would have considered sitting on it? Most people say, no, she would not have considered sitting on it. So would she have considered eating it? So, well, if it was a decent bale of hay, she probably would have considered eating it. And that's all sort of very much common sense to people, is that bales of hay we don't eat, but cows do. And the reason that's the case is because a cow has 4 stomachs and she can digest that complex cellulose in a way that we can't. We understand that we have a different digestive tract than a cow. We have a different digestive tract than a dog, right? Certain things are food for dogs and not food for us, and certain things are food for us and aren't food for dogs. So if you understand that concept, that basically is how it works here with these pathogens. They're really nature's way of saying this plant has not accomplished a high level of health and is therefore not fit for seeding and reproducing. And so, yeah, if she's sending the fungi in, that is not a deficiency of fungicide. That is her critique of your farming practices, your gardening practices, right? When you have that mildew or blight come in, that's a sign that your plants aren't at a level of health that's optimal. And that connects directly to flavor, and it connects to the health of your children. So now this is the opportunity here, is to see that all these things are beautifully intrinsically interrelated. When I started seeing on my farm the pests and diseases go away, right, it actually became a much more viable economic venture, but it was much more exciting because the plants actually, not only were they not diseased, they were healthy, they were vigorous, they were more productive. There was, it's an entirely much more fulfilling endeavor when you're at this point of high levels of vitality in the system. So understand that these are symptoms of lack of vitality. It's not a, I have to go kill this, this, and this. It's a, how can I learn to, have my plants be healthier so that they are no longer susceptible. At least that's how I look at this conversation. Okay, fertigation, irrigation. I think I mentioned this before, saying maintaining moisture is critically important. Like I said, I have in my beds I use 3 lines of drip tape. If we have enough rain coming, I don't necessarily need to even turn them on for a whole season. But sometimes when it doesn't rain for 2 or 3 months, if you're not able to maintain moisture, that is your limiting factor. And so take responsibility for that fact, establish infrastructures in a garden, in a small scale. You have probably the ability to maintain moisture. I would say it's of absolutely critical import. Like I said, with the chicken in the bag over the head, right? Don't feed a cow or don't water a cow for 4 days and see how she's doing. Moisture is foundational for life, and if we aren't maintaining it across the entire soil profile, don't just use your hand as a moisture meter, stick it into the garden at various points in the bed, various depths in the pathway. Use that to assess, how good of a job you're doing to maintain moisture. The more mulch you have on the soil, the more moisture is maintained. But having a functional capacity to maintain moisture and doing it proactively throughout the entire growing season, absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. Simple, inexpensive, and of massive import. So as well, it gives you the ability, if you want to water things through the line, nutrients. There's all kinds of ways you can, make goodies for your plants to help feed them through the season in a way that's can be quite beneficial. And so if you've got an irrigation system, that's a great co-benefit you can have. Okay, foliar spraying. Foliar spraying is the application of nutrients onto the leaf of the foliage, or the foliage. Backpack sprayers are oftentimes that people may have experienced. I personally have a thing called a leaf blower, what's called a mist blower, which is basically a leaf blower with a tank on it, and I can do a half an acre pretty quick with that. But yeah, it's actually it's quite impressive. The speed at which plants will respond if you are able to feed them through their leaf surface. So people may have been hearing more and more about this in the past few years. Let's talk about sap analysis, sort of testing the plant to see how it's doing as it's growing, and then applying nutrients on the leaf onto the foliage. Start with good basic management practices. Ensure you've got enough air in the soil and water in the soil and enough of the minerals present, keeping it covered and fed. Get the biology there. Ensure you have those foundational pieces in place. And then once that's going on, you can dial in a load of extra support and really see amazing things happen. So the capacity to feed your plants through an irrigation system and through a backpack sprayer are really powerful. So those are sort of infrastructures, if you don't have them, to I would seriously suggest getting. All right. And my last slide here, it's called homework. It says build permanent beds. So establish a structure where you have that, good levels of life in the soil. I'm not saying, with walls of wood, stuff brought in from outside. I'm just saying, an area where your growing area and your walking area, get that established, and then try not to disturb it after that. Or if you are going to disturb it in the forms of things like tillage, do it very shallowly. Mulch, apply minerals, get your cover crops established. Obviously, for you guys right now, it's the springtime, so you're not wanting to be putting in cover crops These are things, ideally, I would be suggesting be done in the fall. These are good sort of proactive, systemic establishment things, but you can absolutely do it. You can apply the minerals in the spring. You can certainly mulch as soon as you plant. Get your inoculants, inoculate your seed, get the best seed you can, thinking about the potting soil, what you're going to be feeding your plants. That's a key piece of the puzzle. Fertigation, foliar infrastructure, and I've got written here, read. I know some people love YouTube University. I spend actually a lot of time listening to things on YouTube. So maybe in the olden days, it was most of our knowledge was found in books or by going to attend conferences and things like that. But yeah, I guess this recording itself will be online, and there's an amazing amount of stuff. But always broadening your knowledge base, exploring other perspectives, listening and learning is really powerful. So I've just about used up my hour, and that was my last slide. So I think I'll invite you back in again, Kate.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, I might get you to mute.
Okay.
A bit of. Well, that was amazing, Dan. I know how difficult it is just to talk to a screen, not see anybody. So you've done a superlative job there. So far, no questions in the chat box, but I'm guessing people are ruminating on what you've just said. So maybe I'll ask a couple of questions in the interim. Thinking about our soils that we've got here and what a lot of people got to work with, we have sometimes some quite tired and often sandy soils. What are some of the go-to things we can do to rebuild fertility more quickly in that circumstance?
In the sandy, warm weathered soils, I think most of the things I covered, certainly if you can take a soil test and identify what minerals are deficient, or just get some of that basic rock dust and sea salt, which are wonderful, natural, broad spectrum mineral sources. I think that's going to be wonderful, absolutely wonderful. It's amazing what any soil will do if you just keep it moist and keep it fed. So keeping it covered. Green is great. Brown is also wonderful. Keeping it moist. Nature actually is really, really magic. I think magic is the proper term. What microbes can do if given a shot. The way that, transmutation is technically is a thing. So, we would have called it alchemy in some circles, and that's of course the thing we're not supposed to talk about. But it does seem that different microbes have the ability to take atomic weight 20 and atomic weight 12 and put them together to make atomic weight 32. So even though you do have these really, really old, worn, weathered soils, you also have a lot of microbes in your soils that have evolved with that and have actually evolved to build the nutrients that the plants need. So I think it's really just about creating a dynamic where the microbiome is given half of a shot. And if you just let the microbes be themselves and do their magic work, that really just get back, go take a nap, go play with the kids, because nature's got this. You just need to make sure she's got the support she needs. Yeah.
Yeah, and you gave the example of the Hegarties, and that's a good example, I guess, because they're farming in pretty extreme conditions and they've managed to do amazing things. So if they can do it, we can certainly do it in our backyards, that's for sure. I have a little question also about cover cropping, because I started to do a little bit of that in my vegetable garden 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm never quite sure. You mentioned that you should undersow before the crop finishes if you've got tomatoes or whatever. But I've tended to let the crop finish, pull it out, and then sow in a new cover crop. But are you saying really you don't need to do that? You can just keep it continually going in that case?
I think I mean, certainly, as I was brought up, that was the principle, was that when the season was over, you tilled under the crop and then you put the rye in or whatever. But I don't see any reason to wait that long. Um, you know, if your tomatoes are 5 or 6 feet tall, if your eggplants are 2 or 3 foot tall, whatever it is that's got a decent, that's been established, if the squashes are heading towards the end of their life, there's no reason to wait until they die and pull them out before you put the cover crops in. Why not come through undersow and get something else growing, so that by the time those plants do die, you got a good foot or 2 feet of nice luscious growth going on there. We do really want to be, maintaining as much life in the system as continuously as possible. So, yeah, that's what I would suggest. There's, I see, another question from Mark. At what stage would you suggest terminating cover crops? Well, yeah. and how cold does it get, and how much of your off season, and are they going to seed? And I mean, there's a whole series of things with timing. So you could even potentially do successions of cover crops. I guess some people are concerned about those their seeds becoming viable. So before viability of the seed probably is the most important thing. You get a lot of benefit of that plant growth the longer you wait. So, the bigger the plant is, the more it turns from the green to the brown. That certainly has a very much more positive impact on the level of food for microbes that is produced. So I would say probably as late as possible is a short answer.
So, I might get you to put your yeah, better. Sorry. Yeah, there's a couple of other questions here. Sorry, I didn't notice them before. Jordan asks how we can balance feeding the soil versus feeding the plant. Are there areas that you would recommend us focusing on introducing more, particularly into raised garden beds?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, because it is about maintaining life in the soil, and that's the foundation. And even when you're applying a foliar spray on the leaf surface, understand that plant leaves are covered in microbes, and so you're actually maybe feeding the leaf life and feeding the soil life. I use the metaphor of of vitamins, and sort of in a prophylactic fashion, ensuring a full spectrum of minerals are available for your kids. Like, better to have them ensure sufficiency rather than wait till they get rickets or something. So yeah, in my case, with basically a worm juice base, or something like that, dissolving some trace elements, a little bit of sea salt, etc., and applying, at a rate of a pint or a quart per acre. What's that? A liter or 2 liters per hectare, right? We're not talking about a ton of stuff, but a general prophylactic broad spectrum goodie bag for the microbes, I think is a wonderful prophylactic thing to do. Really, this whole conversation, I think, drives you to the question of communication with your plants, and I think this is something that indigenous cultures were very good at. It was foundational to their way of being, and so I've got a number of friends who are more skilled in those subtle ways of being, and what they communicate is that they hear their plants talking to them. Hey, we'd like some lemonade, please. And you're like, why would you want lemonade? But or the better question, which kind of lemonade would you like, and how much? Literally. I mean, this is just a recounting of a story that a friend of mine called me up with, and she's like, my onion said they want a lemonade. Why would they want lemonade? I'm like, more importantly, congratulations that you can hear them. and so I would say the more that we are in contact with and communication with, Various people receive, communications in various ways. You can use a SAP analysis, send a sample off to a lab, figure out what the nutrients are that are needed in that fashion, or you can wake up and, in the middle of the night from a dream and feel like you've received a message. There's all kinds of ways of discerning, but that concept of, we have the ability in season to supplement and support the nutritional status of the plant is an important one. I'm not going to tell you what the right way is to find out what the plant needs and how much. I think that's everyone's path to come to. I think there's lots of paths to the top of the mountain. But being able to do that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I guess it has to be context driven too, doesn't it? So Doreen asks, how do I best top up my garden bed when it's sunk about 20 centimetres with existing plants? Will I drown the existing plants in soil?
Interesting. I guess from what I can sort of gain from context clues, that would be a garden bed that was probably built from stuff that came in, like was brought in a truck or brought in bags. Probably had a lot of compost in it. For starters, understanding that sinking of 20 centimeters, which is a decent amount, was effectively the organic matter that was the soil turning into carbon dioxide. So what you had then, there was not soil, it was a bunch of compost. And so I'm not sure I would even suggest topping it up. I think I might ask the question, why are you growing in boxes? I generally propose that we should be growing our plants in the land, in the soil that all the rest of the plants in nature grow in. And so bringing in stuff out of a truck, building boxes, separating things from nature, those are all really good ways to pay somebody money unnecessarily. But what we really want is we want to have our roots reaching down into the soil and building soil there, reaching down into the subsoil and building soil there, sort of in that process of sugar being made in the leaves, being injected into the roots. We're actually taking carbon from the atmosphere and putting it into the soil. And that's more nature's path. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that you would need to top it up. That'd be my answer. I personally don't use compost or any sort of nitrogen source on my farm or garden either. I think I mentioned molybdenum, but I didn't explain. Molybdenum is at the center of this thing called the nitrogenase enzyme, and 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. So 3/4 of every breath of air you breathe is nitrogen. There's no shortage of nitrogen in the ecosystem. It's everywhere on the planet. And all plants in nature had evolved the ability in symbiosis with microbes to fix all the nitrogen they need. So we've heard this story about the beans and the peas, or the legumes are nitrogen fixers, and some things like tomatoes and corn are heavy feeders. Well, I mean, in a perverse system, in a dysfunctional system, perhaps you can say that things are heavy feeders. But when you've got a well-established, well-functioning microbiome, when you've got the minerals present that need to be there, when you've got the microbes present that need to be there, your tomatoes will harvest all the nitrogen they need from the atmosphere. Your corn will harvest all the nitrogen it needs. The broccoli will harvest all the nitrogen it needs. So, yeah, I don't think we actually need to be applying compost. I mean, the Haggertys, again, are a great example. Like, they're putting down a couple, what was it, 50 or 100 liters per hectare of a worm juice and compost, liquid. Like, that's not very much nitrogen, and they're growing wheat, and yeah. So when you get that functioning microbiome system going, our plants will harvest what they need. We don't need to apply all these things in many cases that we've been taught to apply.
I don't think, I think it's about 5 litres a hectare for the worm juice. I'm not sure about the compost extract. pretty
Okay.
small amount.
I'm not sure what the concentrate was. I think they're putting it out at 100 liters per hectare, but that's after water's been added to separate. Yeah, it's not much. It's really not much.
So would you, obviously you make compost in the farm, but you're saying you don't apply it as a fertilizer. You use it to make potting mix or as an extract for a soil or foliar.
I don't really make compost. No. I let my plants fall down where they were. Maybe the concept would be a cold compost or a static compost. The basic question I like to ask in all cases is, what does nature do? And what I see nature doing is dropping dead plants on the ground and digesting them in place. And so if you go and you look at my soil, you'll see there's lots of earthworm castings. So I figure I get 20 or 30 tons of earthworm castings per acre per year, based on the level of earthworms I've got in my soil, and based on the number of earthworms, you can do the math on how much they poop. So yeah, I don't feel like I make compost per se. I create an environment where soil life functions well, and as a byproduct, I get tons of worm castings, delivered through the season on my land for free. Maybe that's a good way of framing.
Well, that certainly makes life a lot easier, a lot less work not making compost twice a year. But well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions that I can see. I'll just make sure I've got them all, but that looks like they're all of them, which means you've obviously answered a lot of them already, which is great. So thanks so much, Dan, for your time. I know it's early in the morning for you, particularly when I texted you at 6 a.m. and cold, but we do appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And you've certainly inspired me. I mean, I do quite a bit in my vegetable garden already, but you've just sort of reinforced some things that I know I should be doing that perhaps aren't doing as well as I could be. So it was really great information, and I'm pretty sure you probably inspired the audience as well. For our audience, just before you sign out, can I ask you to complete our survey? I'll just pull it up now. It's really helpful for us to see that we're providing the content that you want, and also our funder to see that you were happy with the content that we did provide. Also, as promised, I will be emailing out to you the recording of this webinar. I'll try and do it this week. If I don't get to it, it will be early next week. And I'll also post it on the Knowledge Bank of Talkin After Hours, our online community and information hub, along with Dan's PDF presentation. If you're not a member yet of Talkin After Hours, I'd strongly encourage you to join. It's free and it's chock full of great information, opportunities to connect and ask questions and chat with other members on topics like this. And you can register for that at our website at lowerblackwood.com.au/Talkin After Hours. And lastly, just a reminder for those of you that live locally, we have a great face-to-face event coming up next Thursday called Stock Smart, Livestock Essentials for Small Properties. The presenter will be Bob Hawke Landcare Award recipient Bruce Maynard, who is very well known for his work, especially in low-stress animal handling. So it will be super, super interesting and a really fun day. So you can book your place at the workshop by heading to the events page on our website. So I think that's it for me. Thanks once again, Dan, very much for taking the time this morning. You can go back and have a proper breakfast now. Thanks also again to our funders, RegenWA and the State NRM, for their support. And of course to you, our audience, for tuning in. I'll say goodbye now and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.